Hello and welcome to the 17th installment of Kalam Digest. Today is Monday, the 9th of December. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague Sam Samre. Sam, how are you on this morning?
I'm okay, actually. Thank you for asking. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Um,
Are you
Congratulations are in
celebrating?
order, I guess, right?
Sorry?
Congratulations are in order.
Yes. Mabruk, Lena. No,
What are
congratulations to the Syrian people, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Assad has fallen. I think we should dedicate the full installment of today's news summary to the fall of the Assad clan, the Assad family, the Assad regime, and I guess the Ba'ath Party forever. There's no more Ba'ath Party.
Well, let's never
Let's
say
never say
never say
never, of course.
die to the Ba'ath Party, but it seems to me, yes. I mean, in general, it's been weakened for a long time and much more of a family kind of conglomeration than an actual functioning party. I would say more like a state apparatus affiliated party than any organically functioning movement. But yes, I have a hard time seeing how they would come back from this, except perhaps from some, weird development where everything kind of falls apart and they're sent back in by the Russians or something in 5 years' time. But let's hope not.
Right. Well, okay. So ostensibly, they're gone unless the Russians reinstall that. I mean, that could obviously happen, like some kind of Afghanistan scenario. So yeah. Anyway, should we sort of say what the hell has happened? Yesterday, we woke up to the rather fascinating, shocking, incredible news that Damascus had fallen to rebels, not coming from the north, but actually coming from the south, from Daraa. We'll get into all of that. But the capital city, Damascus, fell to rebels, or if you're tanky, maybe you'd call them terrorists.
Yeah.
If you're an analyst, you might call most of them uh, Sunni Islamist extremists. At least the people who are carrying the weapons. Anyway, Damascus fell. The Assad regime fell, and Bashar al Assad, the president of the Syrian Republic, fled to Moscow, where he's just now, I see, uh, received political asylum from Russia. Sam, how the hell did this happen? How is it possible? Please give us some insight.
Yeah. How the hell did this happen? Let's just start off by saying no one expected this. Not even us. We're usually much better than everyone else, right? But no one, not even Kalam podcast, expected this to happen. I remember us talking just when you talked about the evening before Damascus fell in the morning. We talked about, oh, perhaps this episode will be already,
Yeah.
let's say, by the time we wake up in the morning. We were kind of almost joking about it, being like, oh, things move so fast now. And then my kid woke me up at 5 in the morning. I was like, okay, so Damascus has fallen and Assad has disappeared. It's like this is insane. I
Yeah.
mean, it's also, I mean, it's how did this happen? Uh, no, I mean, really, no one expected it. Not just because it's been moving fast in the last couple of weeks, but because I think to most people, the Assad regime has, almost everyone who's any kind of relationship to the Middle East, the Assad regime, the family dictatorship, has been, it's almost as constant as North Korea or something to
Yeah.
people thinking about the Middle East. It's just there. They seem to never fall. They seem to go through all these crises. Several of them in the 70s, in the 80s, and in the Damascus Spring around 2000, and then of course the Arab Spring when they were about to fall, and then they were propped up by Russia. Uh, they just seem to be, they're a cat with nine lives. I mean, that's also why I think, I mean, even 2 days before Damascus fell, people were saying like, well, it looks really bad for them right now, but soon they will just, strike back. They have a plan, or Russia will come in and save them. And then just nothing happened. They just kind of fizzle out. And like, there's this, I mean, insane, live state TV interview with the prime minister, I think it is, who's on the street in Damascus saying like, no one worry, we have a very secure cordon around Damascus. The army is ready. They will not get into Damascus. And like 3 hours later, they just like, they're here.
Yeah. I don't think the phrase "famous last words" has ever been more appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, though he did stay actually, but I mean, yeah, it's it makes the famous Baghdad Bob come across as you know, having a better grasp on reality. And I mean, that's also the thing. It seems to surprise even themselves, even the Assad regime, even the rebels, I suppose. You know, I think they were massing up and they were like, okay, we have a last shot here before, Hezbollah manages to perhaps redeploy back to Syria, etc. This is our chance. Let's try to take back Halab, because they're popular in Halab. Halab is not a stronghold for the regime. It's never been. They were like, we can, strengthen our position really, really well here. We have a good shot at this. And then they just kept going and nothing, the famous Syrian Arab National Army just kind of melted away. There was not, I mean, of course there was fighting, but I mean, as far as I've looked through all the Wikipedia pages, there seems to have been like a couple of hundred dead in fighting, and that is like, it's a, I mean, sad to say, that is nothing in this context. It's like they just kind of, everyone just left, which also says something, which is, um, I used this comparison a few times. Like people thought he was Kim Jong Il, but he was a baby dog. He was like this. Oh, okay, so he had no support as soon as the Russians weren't there to like prop him up with actual guns, weapons, boots on the ground, air force. Hezbollah was, in strength on the ground. People were just like, oh, right, let's just not do this anymore. Let's just drop him. Of course, he has some support. I mean, everyone has some support who's been in power for 54 years, but I mean, it's surprising, I think, to themselves and to the rebels how people were just like, oh, we can get rid of him this easily. Let's do that, regardless, basically, of position.
Yeah.
So I think it's just one of those times where it's not like surprising because people weren't, vigilant enough or weren't like paying attention. It was surprising because it was a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Just
Everyone involved, I think.
yeah.
Okay, so I think something that we haven't touched on so much in the podcast is the role of Turkey in this. So Turkey sort of I mean, they've supported various groups. They're huge opponents of the Assad regime, and they've supported various sort of like Sunni Muslim, like moderate to extremist Islamist militias, essentially, and miniature armies from the north that have been fighting the Assad regime for, I mean, at least 10 years.
Yep.
They've given their tacit support to HTS, to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the group that, led this offensive together with other groups. But really, they're the ones who spearheaded this whole thing. What does Turkey have to gain now, and what do you think that they're gonna do with this new situation in Syria?
Uh, I think, first of all, I think they're as surprised as most people are. I don't think they expected this to happen. I don't think they expected to have, like, on their hands a regime that is potentially their ally in control of Damascus within 2 weeks, Their main stake, of course, in this whole conflict has always been, and I mean, this goes back far beyond 2011, the fact that the Assad regime has at times, or very, very, very cynical ways, but tacitly supported the PKK. So the Kurdish left-wing militias or guerrillas working, against the Turkish state. They've done that for a long time. And I mean, not really, as with everything the Assad regime has done, it's been not, out of any kind of conviction, but just because they have this strategy of like keeping some bargaining chips against all their neighbors by having kind of these armed insurrectionary groups, which they could kind of use against them. But so since 2011, of course, the Kurds have taken basically control of the northeast of Syria, the Gezira, or the Gezira area around the Euphrates and the Tigris, and also some other areas of the northeast. These are areas which are, most, to a large extent, populated by Kurds, but not only. I think it's for the areas that are now under control by the Kurdish federal government, as they call it. I think it's about 50-50 Kurdish and Arabs and other Christian groups who identify as Syrian Syriacs or Assyrians, etc. But anyway, I mean, so Turkey's main stake in this game is to wipe out that threat to their I mean, what they perceive as a threat to Turkey. Um, and that's why they've been. I mean, I don't think they have counted for a long time on actually bringing down the Assad government. But so that's how it starts out for them. They bring in these or support these militias or armed groups to protect their border as they see it, and to strike at their enemies inside Syria. And of course, I mean, this goes back. I mean, one of the few political conflicts in the Middle East which seems to have been personal. Erdogan's, the things he's been saying about Erdogan is like, about Assad is on a personal level. He's like, I will hunt you down and kill you if I can.
Yeah.
Seems to be like, I'm not sure why, but it seems to be like a deep seated kind of mistrust between them.
So another player that obviously is central to all of this because it managed to weaken Hezbollah to the extent that it couldn't defend the Assad regime anymore is Israel, obviously. Um, Israel has been making inroads in creating a further buffer zone. I mean, they already occupy Syrian territory in the Golan Heights, the Jolan, which ironically is also the last name of the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, Jolani. But they've also been conducting airstrikes on military sites and various targets throughout Syria. What do you think is going through the minds of Israeli leaders, and what is their objective now that the Assad regime has fallen?
Um, I think out of all the I mean, there's such a plethora of foreign forces involved in this war. You have to make like a spreadsheet or something to keep track of all the countries that have some kind of stake in this civil war. But I think out of all of them, Israel is, of course, or I think it's pretty obviously the one with the least kind of positive program, and also the least to win. The only thing they can win is to have chaos in Syria. That's good for them, because they don't want there to be like any strong, stable governments surrounding it, basically. But on the other hand, I mean, there's no possible outcome of this war with this, the ongoing conflict in Syria, which would be good for Israel because it's not on the table that any government which is actually supported by majority of Syrians would be pro-Israel. That would just not happen. It's as probable as like Smotrich being a BDS activist or something. So I mean, what they're trying to do, I think, is destabilize stuff. Of course, strike at their most imminent or direct enemies like Hezbollah, and then I think they are, of course, I mean, they're attacking and invading parts of Syria around the Golan Heights right now, as you mentioned. But the foreign minister of Israel has said like this is a temporary deployment. Are not interested in actually entering Syria or like entering the fray as a warring party to this conflict. And I mean, as much as I distrust anything the Israelis say on anything, I think it's reasonable to think that is their goals are limited. Their goals are to kind of safeguard the territories that they've already occupied and annexed. I mean, the Golan Heights, and to make sure that there's kind of no fallout from any ongoing fighting in Syria reaching them. But of course, this is in the short term. This is a huge gain for them because Syria has been instrumental in supplying Hezbollah and to some extent Hamas with forces and arms, etc.
Okay, so let's talk about HTS and its leader, Jolani, who I mentioned. His name is, sorry, Abu Muhammad Jolani?
Yes, I think so. Yes, but this is a nom de guerre. We should remember that he took this name. He is from the Golan Heights originally, so
Right.
that's why he took Ajulani. As as you do a kunya or like a
Right. Okay.
adjective name. So he took that because his family is from there, but he chose it himself to symbolize that he's from the occupied territories.
Okay. Well, yeah, that does bring me to his background then. I mean, he at one point he was a fighter in literally in the Islamic State in ISIS, Daesh.
Yeah.
under another leader who also took his name from the place that he was from, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. That is where Abu Muhammad Jawlani began sort of his militia career. He then was involved with Al Qaeda in Syria, in under the guise of Jabhat al Nusra, the Nusra Front, which was essentially Al Qaeda's Syrian branch. Um, then a lot of different things happened, and Jabhat al-Nusra, I think, cut ties with Al-Qaeda politically, uh, which we might get into the details of, but essentially the consequence of all of these like different sort of conflicts and differing opinions on how to move forward resulted in Jawlani cutting ties completely with both Daesh and Al-Qaeda and creating what is now known as HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a kind of like very administrative title, the Committee to Liberate Syria, something like that.
Yep.
And he now renounces his jihadist past and claims to, be a proponent of some kind of moderate Sunni Muslim Islamism, uh, which I guess you could compare to some kind of Christian democracy in Europe, maybe a little more extreme than that. But uh, I've listened to I've listened to people say that they believe him when he says that he's changed his views. I personally find it hard to believe. Sam, what do you think?
I mean, I fully understand anyone who does not believe a word he says. He has a very, a long track record of being part and a leader in some of the most horrendous kind of, I mean, genocidal, basically, jihadist groups in Syria. You know, as you mentioned, with Al Qaeda's local branch, etc. Uh, but I mean, it does. It's so I mean, we'll have to wait and see basically what comes out of this. Well, how does he act when he is? I mean, because at the moment, very briefly perhaps, but at the moment he seems to be, the man in power in terms of military strength. The prime minister is still in power, of course. The old Assad prime minister has been left in power by Al Julani by his agreement. But in terms of like who controls, he could depose that guy in a minute if he wanted to, and he doesn't want to for some reason. So we'll just have to say that there's good reasons to be distrustful of this guy. But on the other hand, if we look at what he's been saying, um, he's been saying the same thing for a long time now, which is basically, I'm still a Sunni, like, I'm a Salafi, in the good way, or the way that they perceive that as being just, I'm a good Sunni Muslim.
Yeah,
But I believe in a Syria for all Syrians. I believe in, protection for minorities. And this is, as we all know, I mean, that it is not something that would be weird, actually, if looking at, the tradition of how like Islamic law would recommend like a proper Sunni government to behave. Uh, the fact that that hasn't happened a lot in the last decades is another thing. Uh, but looking at what he's saying, he's being very clear. He's clearly trying to speak to all Syrians. He's clearly trying to be like, I'm no longer like a jihadi international revolutionary. I'm a Syrian Sunni Muslim. I believe, in a strong Syrian state for Syrian people, regardless of ethnic background or religion, etc. And I want stability and peace and to give everyone the chance to rebuild their country. And we also have to recognize how this is a very, very, very welcome message for, I would say, 90% of Syrians. Assad's only claim to, support, basically, apart from the Alawi groups where he has his personal strength or family background. I mean, in general, it was just like, he's in power. He can rule this country. Will not be killed if he rules. There will not be a civil war. There will not be massacres. Now he's gone. I mean, he has none of that left. I think there's very little, positive actual wish to be ruled by Assad, apart from perhaps within, as I said, I mean, some Alawi circles. In that sense, and if he's in power and he says, this is what I want to do, peace, quiet, stability, no civil war, let's negotiate an agreement where we can all kind of establish some kind of transitory government. I mean, that is something that speaks to most Syrians.
yeah,
And let's just hope that he's sincere. I mean, of course, for me personally, we have nothing in common in terms of political positions, but I can also see the fact that someone who manages to just stabilize the country is what everyone's after at the moment. But it will not be up to him. I mean, eventually, I mean, in the end, there's all these foreign powers that are interfering, and if they agree that he should be in power or that some kind of brokered peaceful transition, negotiated transition should be, what's happening, then that will happen. If they don't, then there will be a civil war, and he will just go back to being one of the factional fighters, and perhaps also again radicalize.
So what is he actually said in terms of moving forward, like technically? Are we talking about a transition government? Will the old sort of, I mean, civil government of Bashar al Assad stay in place for the time being? Do we have like a, I know it's just day two, but is there kind of like a political roadmap moving forward?
Yeah, there was an interview out with Hadi al-Bahra, who is the no, sorry, yeah, that's the Syrian National Coalition leader. No one really knows how much power or influence even he has, but freely speaking,
What is that? Say what?
well, it's the old umbrella organization of the opposition forces to Assad. It was a huge thing back in 2012, and then it kind of deteriorated step by step, and it fractured, and then it kind of came back together. But supposedly, they're the kind of legal um, alternative government. As I said, I mean, I don't think anyone knows how much actual power a guy like that wields at the moment. But he came out saying like, we recognize the power of the HDS. We recognize that it's a great thing that the prime minister of the Assad government has. He was very clear about this, saying like Assad is a coward who fled the country. Mohammed Ghazi al-Jalali is the prime minister of the old prime minister of Assad. He stayed, and Hadi Mahra said, like, we showed him now that we're not crazy people. We didn't kill him. We welcome the fact that he's still here and that he can manage a transition. So according to the SNC, then what they're saying that everyone's after is, they think they're talking about like an 18-month period of transition, where there will be like a new constitution, because of course the constitution of the Ba'ath Party is pretty weird. It says stuff like, only the Ba'ath Party can have any political positions, etc. So you can't really have elections without rewriting the whole structure of the state. But they're talking about an 18-month transition period with some kind of caretaker government, of course, being put in place very, very quickly. And then if we look at Al-Jilani, he said, he hasn't said that much specifically, but he's been very clear on saying like, we're not looking to take power for ourselves. We're looking for like a coalition of basically, he's talking about all opposition forces, but presumably he'll have an issue with the Kurds demanding autonomy, etc. We don't know yet really how they're interacting on the ground. There's still ongoing, as far as I know, there's still ongoing negotiations around certain parts of Halab, for example, which have been occupied by Kurdish forces, where they're like, should they be allowed to leave, or should they reintegrate into the country or whatever. But so what we know there is that everyone's saying that they're on board with this kind of negotiated deal, and the prime minister of the Fulul, the Orid regime, is still in place, and he is saying like, I'm happy to work with this. I want a government for all Syrians.
I think you did a Freudian slip. You said the Orient regime instead of the Ancien regime. That's hilarious.
This Orientalist regime of the Ba'ath Party believes in a renaissance anymore.
Okay, so Sam, we're nearing the end of our time here, but let's talk about some of the main obstacles to what you just presented, which would be fantastic. I mean, if there would be a kind of 18-month transition and then a civilian government taking over, elections, democracy in Syria, people choosing who they want themselves to be ruled by, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? But obviously, there are some serious obstacles to that. Please present them to us so we can end this episode on a common theme of chaos and the tragedy.
Moving towards World War III. Well, we hope not. I mean, just to say that, yes, it's very optimistic, of course, and it would be a beautiful thing. There's a lot of reasons to think that it will not happen. But let's also look back and say, like, you know, in the 50s and the 40s, after the French left, Syria did have elections. You know, for a while they did have actual elections where people voted and prime ministers, you know, left power to when they lost elections. You know, so this is not a country that has always been in, you know, a total shithole. You know, that's just, you know, it's easy to think that if you were just joining us and have just heard about the last 10 years or something, but it really isn't necessarily that has to be the future of this country. So let's hope for the best. But if we look at the main obstacle, I mean, one basic thing is, of course, it's been a civil war for 15 years. That is always a problem. You have to reintegrate somehow. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of young men, usually, who are like armed and have basically only done one thing, which is like kill and murder people and, you know, live by mafia methods, you know? So this is the same thing as in every country that's gone through this kind of crisis. Same as Yugoslavia, same as Lebanon, same as, you know, nothing specific about Syria with this. But this is hard task, you know, how do you reintegrate people into society and how do you stabilize that? Then, of course, as I already mentioned briefly, the Kurdish question is huge. The Kurds have basically control over it. It's almost a third of the country, the northeast. And I mean, you know, for Western leftists, they often come across as kind of the heroes of the story, and, you know, not in any way to downplay, you know, the good aspects of the Kurdish self-rule, or, you know, their important part in fighting Daesh, and, you know, a lot of progressive things about that. But it's also, you know, they're basically just taking it into their own hands to disintegrate the Syrian state. And I'm pretty certain that no government that comes into power in Damascus will, in the long run, accept that. So, I mean, how will that play out? And Turkey, of course, just wants it crushed. That's their ideal solution. So, I mean, what we can hope for there is that there would be some kind of negotiation where they would accept a federal solution with some kind of self-rule and, you know, respect for the canton system that they have in place, and also, of course, like a stronger representation for the non-Kurdish people in those areas. So, I mean, and that is probably where I would see the main stumbling block. Someone siding with the Kurds all out and then having a civil war between some kind of Damascus-based, quote-unquote, Arab government and a Kurdish government based in Rojava. But then, you know, and that's part of the major obstacle, which is a bunch of obstacles, which is like, what are the regional and global powers involved in this conflict? Will they all agree that it's a good thing that Syria doesn't fall apart? It just needs for, you know, I mean, Israel, of course, they will want Syria to remain and, you know, indefinitely fucked up. You know, that's the best they can hope for. They cannot hope for installing any kind of government in Syria that would be pro-Israel in the long run. That is just, you know, they would never think they could do that.
Yeah.
So, but as long as, I mean, so they're on their side, but you have Turkey, Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the GCC. You have, you know, the US, of course, even though they're totally, you know, far away from any kind of position of strength right now because how much they fucked up their diplomacy in the region over the last year. But, you know, these are all important forces. If any one of those decide all out, we want Syria to disintegrate, I mean, it's hard to think that it will not be able to destroy things, you know? So
Yeah.
that's the main obstacles.
Yeah, just to add quickly that Trump has explicitly said that he doesn't give a fuck about this. In a very eloquent social media post,
As always.
he said, "This is not our fight. We don't care. Let them handle this. Let them shoot it out amongst themselves." So at least we know that that's going to be Trump's position moving and the U.S.'s position moving forward, if nothing changes. Which it definitely might.
I mean, just to respond to that, I mean, if that would actually happen, I mean, that would probably be a good thing because, as we talked about before, the last episode we talked about this, where you said I was incredibly optimistic, where I said that perhaps a solution might be possible in Syria because Iran and Saudi Arabia are no longer mortal enemies. So, I mean, if the US, you know, just sits it out, Russia doesn't have the forces to do anything really on the ground, then it's just Turkey. I mean, just Turkey, that's a lot, but, you know, if Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey can agree that, we will let this kind of work out, and the US doesn't do anything, then, I would say that there's a 30% chance this might work out well.
Well, let's put our hopes into that 30%.
Yeah.
Sam, Carl Sumner, thank you very much for joining me this morning for this week's Kalam Digest, our weekly news summary on Monday, the 9th of December. I hope you have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Same to you.